God gave Moses the most important mission in human history: go to Egypt, free my people. Moses argued 5 times and begged God to send someone else. But God answered every excuse, and Moses finally said yes. He picked up his staff, loaded his family, and started walking toward Egypt. Then, 3 verses later, the same God tried to kill him. No warning, no explanation. And the person who saved his life, most people have never heard her name. The story of Moses is one of the most familiar in the Bible. Born Hebrew, raised inside Pharaoh's household as Egyptian royalty, forced to flee after taking a man's life, and then spending 40 years as a shepherd in the wilderness of Midian. Then the burning bush, the voice of God, the impossible assignment. In the book of Exodus, chapters 3 and 4, Moses and God have the most reluctant conversation in all of Scripture. Moses gives 5 separate objections. He says he is nobody. He says no one will believe him. He says he cannot speak well. God answers each one, provides miraculous signs, and appoints Moses' brother Aaron to speak on his behalf. Moses finally agrees to go. He takes his wife Zipporah and his sons, loads them onto a donkey, and begins the long walk toward Egypt. But consider what that walk actually meant. After 40 years in Midian, Moses had built a real life. A quiet household, a wife who understood him, children raised in the hills and language of Midian, not Egypt. He had agreed to go back. He was walking forward, but he was also carrying everything he was about to lose. Then, in Exodus chapter 4, verses 24 through 26, something happens that has no clear parallel anywhere else in all of Scripture. At a lodging place on the road, God came to Moses and sought to kill him. Not a dream, not a vision. The text is direct. Zipporah acts immediately. She takes a flint knife, circumcises their son on the spot, touches Moses with the foreskin, and says, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." The attack stops, and without any further explanation, the text simply moves on. Moses continues his journey. History continues, but those 3 verses remain in the narrative like a locked room that everyone passes and no one opens. To understand what may be happening in those 3 verses, you have to go back to Genesis chapter 17. This is where God formalized the covenant with Abraham. As part of that agreement, God established a physical sign: circumcision. Every male in Abraham's family was required to carry this mark. God called it a sign of belonging. He stated plainly that any male without it had broken the covenant on his own side of the agreement. Moses was born into that family, but 40 years in Midian meant raising his sons in a Midianite world. At least one of his boys had never received the covenant sign. Archaeological evidence from the ancient Near East confirms that circumcision was widely practiced during this period. Egypt used it as a rite of passage. Peoples across the eastern Mediterranean carried it as a tribal identity marker. But in the Abrahamic tradition, the meaning was different. It was not ceremony. It was a declaration: I belong to this covenant, permanently, with your own body as evidence. Moses was a man between 3 worlds, born Hebrew, formed as Egyptian, living as Midianite. The uncircumcised son was not a minor oversight. It was proof that Moses had never fully closed the door behind him. He was walking toward the mission of God while his own household stood outside the sign of the covenant he was going to represent. In the ancient world, a representative who could not demonstrate full covenant standing had no authority to represent the covenant people at all. Here is where honest scholarship must acknowledge something difficult. This passage has generated more debate than almost any other section of Exodus, and none of the major interpretations fully resolves the problem. The most basic question is never answered by the text itself. Who exactly was God attacking? Moses or his son? The Hebrew wording in these 3 verses is unusually unclear. Ancient translations, including the early Greek version of Scripture known as the Septuagint, read it differently. Some translators understood the threat was directed at Moses. Others believed the son was in danger, and the meaning of Zipporah's actions shifts depending on which reading you follow. Some scholars hold the covenantal interpretation. God was enforcing the terms of the Abrahamic promise. Moses could not stand before Pharaoh as God's representative while his own household stood outside the covenant sign. Zipporah understood this immediately and acted without hesitation. The attack stopped because the requirement was finally met. Other scholars working in historical criticism propose a different reading. Figures like Frank Moore Cross of Harvard University argued that this passage is a preserved fragment of a very old ritual, possibly with Midianite roots, that the compilers of Exodus encountered but could not fully explain. They considered it too ancient and too sacred to remove, so they kept it exactly as they found it. 3 verses, unexplained and intact. A third interpretation centers on the phrase, bridegroom of blood. This expression appears nowhere else in all of Scripture. Scholars have traced its possible roots to ancient initiation rites where a blood offering sealed a permanent union. In this reading, Zipporah is not merely performing a ritual requirement. She is issuing a declaration. You are no longer a man between worlds. You fully belong to this covenant, to this people, to this calling. And that declaration is what stops the attack. All 3 interpretations arrive at the same recognition. The text preserved a moment that even its original authors found difficult to explain. Some passages survive not because they give answers, but because they refuse to let the question go. Think about what Moses was carrying when he arrived at that lodging place. He had accepted the most terrifying assignment in human history: return to a country where he was wanted. Stand before the most powerful ruler on earth. Demand freedom for an entire enslaved people using only a staff and a voice he himself had called inadequate. He had argued 5 times against this calling and agreed only when every exit was closed. Modern psychology has a term for what Moses may have been experiencing: identity foreclosure. It describes the paralysis that happens when someone has accepted a calling in words but not yet in the full depth of who they are. The assignment is real. The internal resistance is also real, and something has to break before the person can actually move forward. The uncircumcised son is the physical evidence of that unresolved tension. Moses had built 40 years of Midianite life, a quiet life, and some part of him had never fully released it. The covenant sign was not just a ritual requirement. It was a declaration of total belonging, and Moses had not yet made that declaration for his own child. Zipporah makes it for him, without hesitation. She is a Midianite by birth, an outsider to the Abrahamic covenant, and she becomes the person who rescues the man who was sent to rescue an entire nation. She saw what he could not yet face, and she acted. The person least expected to hold authority stepped forward because no one else could. We will never fully know what happened at that lodging place on the road to Egypt. The text gives 3 verses and no explanation. Thousands of years of scholarship have produced interpretations, not certainty. And perhaps that is exactly the right response to a passage this old, this strange, and this honest about the human cost of answering a calling. What it leaves behind is the image of a woman who acted when a man could not. And it leaves behind a question the story of the Exodus itself depends on. Can a person truly carry a calling they have not yet fully owned? The text seems to answer, not without cost. Some doors must be closed before others can open. If these ancient mysteries move you, and if you believe that faith and history deserve honest investigation together, subscribe to Eden Unsolved. We ask these questions every week without pretending the answers are simple. If this episode made you think, leave a like. It helps more people find the search.